I watched through my father's cabin window as 3 HOA board members marched through knee-deep snow toward the front door, and I knew this was going to be bad. My father, Xander Yates, was somewhere in downtown Portland, Maine, stuck because of the worst ice storm to hit New England in 20 years, and these vultures had clearly been waiting for exactly this moment. I had driven up from Boston 2 days earlier to check on Dad's place when the weather reports started looking apocalyptic. The cabin sat on a beautiful 3-acre lot in Pine Ridge Estates, a development that had been farmland when Dad bought the property back in 2001. He had built this place with his own hands, a retirement dream that he had poured his heart and soul into for 5 years, before the first HOA even existed. Then developers bought the surrounding land, built cookie-cutter McMansions, and formed an HOA that immediately tried to bring Dad's property under their control. The knock on the door was aggressive, demanding. I opened it to find a woman in her mid-40s wearing a white parka that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her blonde hair was styled despite the weather emergency, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "I am Deborah Fletcher, president of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA. This property is in violation of multiple ordinances, and we are here to post notice of immediate seizure due to unpaid fines and fees totaling $47,000. I stared at her. "Excuse me. My father does not even belong to your HOA. His property predates your development by years." She held up a clipboard with papers that flapped in the brutal wind. "Mr. Yates signed an agreement in 2019 acknowledging HOA jurisdiction after the county rezoned this area. These fines have been accumulating for violations including unapproved exterior paint colors, unauthorized outbuildings, and failure to maintain landscaping to community standards." "You are insane," I said flatly. "My father never signed anything. And even if he had, you cannot just seize someone's property during a state of emergency." The man standing behind her, wearing an expensive suit under his winter coat, stepped forward. "I am Martin Cross, HOA legal counsel. The seizure is entirely legal under Maine property law and the signed covenant. We have a court order." He handed me papers through the doorway. I grabbed them, scanning quickly. The document looked official, with a judge's signature dated 3 days ago. But something felt deeply wrong about this entire situation. Where is my father supposed to go? The roads are impassable. The power is out across half the state. Deborah's expression did not change. "That is not the HOA's concern. Mr. Yates has had years to pay these fines. We are taking possession immediately. You have 1 hour to remove any personal belongings." "This is my father's home," I said, my voice rising. "He is 73 years old. You cannot throw him out into an ice storm." "We can and we are," Deborah said. 1 hour, Mr. Yates. The locks will be changed, and new security measures will be implemented." They walked away, boots crunching through the ice-crusted snow. I stood in the doorway, freezing air rushing past me, holding papers that claimed my father's entire life could be taken away by a neighborhood committee. I pulled out my phone and called Dad. "Xavier," his voice crackled through a terrible connection. "How is the cabin?" "Dad, the HOA just showed up with a court order. They claim they are seizing the property for unpaid fines. $47,000. Did you sign any agreement with them?" The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought we had been disconnected. Then I heard him breathing, heavy and slow. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. In 2019, that woman, Deborah, came to my door with papers. She said the county required everyone in the area to register with the HOA for emergency services coordination. I signed a form, just a simple registration form, or so I thought. Dad, they are saying you agreed to HOA jurisdiction. I signed a registration form, Xavier. That is all. I never agreed to their rules, never paid their fees because I never believed I owed them. My lawyer, Jim Peterson, told me I had a strong case, that the covenant was fraudulent. We were supposed to go to court next month. Well, someone issued a court order. They are changing the locks in an hour. Do not let them into that cabin, Dad said, his voice turning hard. I built that place. I'm not letting some power-hungry HOA president steal it because she does not like that I would not bow down to her fake authority. Dad, they have a court order. Then we get a better lawyer. I am stuck at the emergency shelter at Portland High School. Roads will not be clear until tomorrow at the earliest. But Xavier, you need to secure that property. Check my desk in the den. There is a folder labeled Pine Ridge Legal. Everything is in there. Call my lawyer, Jim Peterson. His card is in the folder. The call dropped. I rushed to the den, a cozy room with built-in bookshelves and a massive oak desk Dad had made himself. The folder was exactly where he said, stuffed with documents, correspondence, and legal opinions. I flipped through quickly. There were letters from Dad to the HOA, refusing to acknowledge their authority. Letters from the HOA demanding payment for violations. Photos of the property showing the supposed infractions which, from what I could tell, included things like having a vegetable garden, a tool shed painted forest green instead of approved beige, and firewood stacked along the north side of the cabin. I found Jim Peterson's business card and called. The receptionist told me he was snowed in at his home in Augusta but could talk. When Jim got on the line, I explained the situation in rapid detail. They did what? Jim's outrage came through clearly despite the bad connection. Xavier, that court order is fraudulent or obtained through misrepresentation. Judge Martinez would never approve a property seizure during a declared state of emergency. I am going to make some calls. In the meantime, do not leave that property. If they try to force entry, call the police. Will the police even respond in this weather? They have to. This is an illegal eviction at minimum, possibly criminal trespass and elder abuse. Your father is elderly and this is his primary residence. I will call the Cumberland County Sheriff directly. Stay put. I hung up and looked around the cabin that Dad had built log by log. Every piece of wood had been selected, measured, and placed by his hands. The stone fireplace had taken him an entire summer, each rock chosen from the property itself. This was not just a house. This was Dad's legacy, his proof that a working man could build something beautiful and lasting. The hour passed slowly. I packed nothing. Instead, I photographed every room, every detail, documented the entire property from inside. If they wanted a fight, I would give them evidence. When the knock came again, it was not Deborah. It was a locksmith's van in the driveway and two HOA board members I had not met before. The locksmith, a guy about my age with an uncomfortable expression, approached the door. "Hey man, I am just here to change the locks. Nothing personal." "Do you know this is an illegal eviction?" I asked. He hesitated. "I just got a work order from the HOA. I do not want trouble." "Then leave," I said. "Because when this goes to court, and it will, anyone who participated in an illegal eviction during a state of emergency is going to face serious consequences." The locksmith looked back at the two board members, both middle-aged men in expensive winter gear. One of them shouted, "We have a court order. Do your job or we will find someone who will." "Let me see the court order again," I called out. The board member trudged through the snow and shoved the papers at me through the partially open door. I examined them more carefully this time. The judge's signature looked legitimate, but the date bothered me. 3 days ago meant it was issued the day before the ice storm hit, when weather services were already predicting catastrophic conditions. What judge would approve a property seizure knowing it would be executed during a state of emergency? I pulled out my phone and called Jim Peterson back. Jim, the court order is dated 3 days ago. Does that seem odd to you? Very odd. Let me call Judge Martinez's chambers right now. Do not let them in. I closed the door and locked it. Through the window, I watched the HOA members and locksmith arguing in the driveway. My phone rang. It was Jim. Xavier, Judge Martinez never issued that order. Her clerk confirmed she has been out of state for a family emergency for the past week. Someone forged that document. Call the police immediately. This is fraud and attempted theft. I dialed 911. The dispatcher sounded exhausted, probably fielding emergency calls nonstop since the ice storm began. When I explained the situation, there was a long pause. Sir, we have officers responding to life-threatening emergencies only right now. Downed power lines, people trapped in vehicles, medical emergencies. I can file a report, but I cannot guarantee when an officer will be available. This is a home invasion with a forged court document, I said. They are trying to illegally evict an elderly man during a state of emergency. I understand, sir. I will mark it as priority, but I need you to understand we have limited resources right now. Do you feel you are in immediate physical danger? Not yet, I admitted. Then please stay inside, keep your doors locked, and document everything. An officer will respond as soon as possible. I hung up feeling helpless. Outside, the locksmith was packing up his tools and getting back in his van. The 2 board members watched him leave, then pulled out their phones. I could see them making calls, gesturing angrily. 20 minutes later, a truck pulled up towing a small excavator. My stomach dropped. They were not going to wait for the locksmith. They were going to force their way in. I called Dad. They have got an excavator. I think they are going to break down the door. Call everyone, Dad said. Call the news stations, call the county sheriff, call the state police. Make noise, Xavier. These people think they can do whatever they want because they have money and fake authority. Show them they are wrong. I started making calls. The local news station, WMTW, actually answered. The producer I spoke with sounded interested, especially when I mentioned forged court documents and an illegal eviction during a state of emergency. We have a crew that could get there in a few hours if the roads cooperate. Can you send us photos and video? Absolutely, I said. I started recording everything on my phone. The excavator rumbled to life. The operator, a younger guy wearing a construction company jacket, positioned the machine near the front gate of the property. Dad's property had a simple wooden fence with a gate, more decorative than secure. The excavator's bucket swung toward it. I ran outside. Stop, this is private property, you are trespassing. One of the board members, a tall man with silver hair, walked toward me. The HOA owns this property now. We are securing it. Go back inside before you get hurt. The court order is forged, I said loudly, making sure I was recording. Judge Martinez never signed it. She has been out of state. You are committing fraud, theft, and illegal eviction. The police have been notified and news crews are on their way. The silver-haired man's face flickered with uncertainty. He pulled out his phone and walked away, talking rapidly to someone. The excavator operator shut off his machine. Deborah's white Range Rover came speeding up the driveway, fishtailing slightly on the ice. She jumped out, her face red with anger. What is the holdup? I gave clear instructions. He says the court order is forged, the silver-haired man said. That is ridiculous, Deborah snapped. She marched up to me. You are interfering with legal HOA business. Leave now, or we will have you arrested for trespassing. This is my father's property, I said, keeping my phone camera pointed at her. And you forged a court document. Judge Martinez never signed that order. She has been out of state for a week. When the police arrive, you are going to be arrested. Deborah's confidence wavered for just a moment. Then she squared her shoulders. I have no idea what you are talking about. That order was obtained through proper legal channels by our attorney. Then call your attorney, I said. Have him confirm which judge signed it and when. She pulled out her phone and walked back to her Range Rover. I could see her making an animated call. The excavator operator climbed down from his machine and approached me. Hey man, is this legit? I do not want to be part of something illegal. The court order is forged, I told him. Judge Martinez confirmed through her clerk that she never issued it. If you help them break into this property, you are part of a criminal conspiracy. He swore under his breath and pulled out his own phone, presumably calling his boss. Within 5 minutes, he was loading the excavator back onto the trailer. I am out, he announced to the HOA members. My company is not touching this until you have legitimate paperwork. Deborah was still on the phone in her Range Rover. The 2 other board members stood in the driveway looking uncertain. The silver-haired one kept glancing at the road like he wanted to leave. Then I heard sirens. A Cumberland County Sheriff's SUV came crawling up the icy road, lights flashing. Relief flooded through me. Deputy Richardson was a stocky woman in her 50s who looked like she had not slept in days. She talked to me first, examined the court order, made several phone calls, then spent 15 minutes talking to Deborah and the other board members. When she came back to me, her expression was grim. Mr. Yates, I confirmed with Judge Martinez's chambers that this order is not legitimate. However, I need to investigate further before I can make arrests. The HOA president claims their attorney obtained the order and she believed it was valid. That might give her a defense against fraud charges. She tried to evict my elderly father during an ice storm with a fake court order, I said. How is that not criminal? It probably is, Deputy Richardson said, but I need to build a proper case. What I can do right now is order everyone to leave this property and inform the HOA that any further attempts to enter or seize this property will result in immediate arrests for trespassing and attempted theft. She went back to the HOA members, and I could see her delivering the message firmly. Deborah's face was furious, but she got in her Range Rover and left. The other board members followed quickly. Deputy Richardson returned to me. Keep everything locked up. Document everything. I am going to contact the district attorney's office. This is elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft. I will be in touch. After she left, I went back inside the cabin and sat down heavily on Dad's couch. My hands were shaking from adrenaline. I called Dad and updated him on everything. They are not going to stop, Dad said quietly. Deborah has been trying to control this entire development since she moved here. She hates that my property sits right at the main entrance, and I would not let her dictate what I do with it. This is about power for her. Jim Peterson says we have grounds for a major lawsuit, I said. Good, Dad said. But Xavier, I need you to understand something. That cabin represents 25 years of my life. I am not going to let them take it through legal tricks and intimidation. If we have to fight, we fight all the way. Over the next 2 days, as the ice storm finally passed, and crews worked to restore power and clear roads, I lived in Dad's cabin and gathered evidence. I found more documents in his files showing the HOA's harassment campaign. Letters demanding he remove his vegetable garden because it was not aesthetically pleasing. Complaints about his truck being parked in his own driveway. Fines for having firewood visible from the street. It was insane. When Dad finally made it back home, he looked exhausted but determined. We sat at his kitchen table and spread out all the documents. Jim Peterson drove up from Augusta that evening to meet with us. "I have good news and bad news," Jim said. "The good news is the district attorney is investigating the forged court order. Martin Cross, the HOA attorney, claims he obtained the order from Judge Martinez before she left town, but the clerk's office has no record of it. Either he is lying or someone in that office helped him create a fraudulent document." "What is the bad news?" Dad asked. "The bad news is the underlying issue. That registration form you signed in 2019 is being interpreted by the HOA as acceptance of their covenant. I still think we can fight it, but it is going to be expensive and time-consuming. The HOA has deep pockets because they have been collecting fees from every other property owner in Pine Ridge Estates for years." "How much are we talking?" I asked. $50,000 for a trial, maybe more if it goes to appeal. And that is just to establish that Xander's property is not subject to HOA jurisdiction. We would need separate litigation to address the harassment and the attempted illegal eviction." Dad was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I worked for 40 years as a master carpenter. I saved every penny I could. I built this cabin myself to avoid debt. I have maybe $30,000 in savings. I cannot afford a long legal battle." "There might be another option," Jim said carefully. "We file a police report for the attempted illegal eviction and the harassment campaign. If the DA pursues criminal charges, the HOA's leadership could face serious penalties. That might make them willing to settle and leave you alone." "And if they do not?" Dad asked. Jim sighed. "Then we are back to expensive litigation." I spent that night in the guest room, unable to sleep. The injustice of the situation burned in my mind. Dad had built something beautiful, harmed no one, and now was being destroyed financially by people who thought their opinions about landscaping gave them the right to ruin lives. The next morning, I drove into the Pine Ridge Estates development to look around. The neighborhood was exactly what I expected. Huge houses packed close together, every lawn identical, every mailbox the same approved style. It looked sterile and soulless. Dad's cabin, with its natural wood exterior, stone fireplace, and wild vegetable garden, must have offended every controlling instinct in Deborah's body. I stopped at the community center, a large building near the entrance that served as HOA headquarters. Inside, I found a receptionist and asked to see the HOA board meeting minutes for the past 5 years. She looked nervous but told me they were public record. She printed out thick stacks of documents. I sat in my truck reading through them. The obsession with Dad's property was evident in nearly every meeting. Deborah, who had been president for 4 years, mentioned his property repeatedly. She called it an eyesore, a liability, and a threat to property values. She proposed fines, liens, and legal action in meeting after meeting. Other board members occasionally pushed back, but Deborah always got her way. Then I found something interesting. In the minutes from 8 months ago, there was a discussion about expanding the community center. The proposed expansion would require additional land. Deborah had suggested acquiring the Yates property through legal means and incorporating it into the HOA common area. The vote was tabled, but the intent was clear. This was not just about controlling Dad. This was about taking his property. I called Jim Peterson immediately. They want his land. This whole thing is a land grab. That changes things, Jim said. If we can prove the fines and harassment were a pretext to force a seizure so they could take the property for their own use, that is fraud and theft on a much bigger scale. Send me those meeting minutes immediately. I photographed every page and sent them to Jim. Then I drove back to Dad's cabin to tell him what I had found. He listened quietly, his jaw tight. "They are not getting my land," he said finally. "I do not care what it takes." The next week brought developments rapidly. The district attorney charged Martin Cross, the HOA attorney, with fraud and filing false documents. He immediately tried to claim Deborah had instructed him to obtain the court order by any means necessary. Deborah claimed she had no knowledge the order was forged. They were turning on each other. Deputy Richardson came by to tell us that the investigation had expanded. "We are looking at the entire HOA operation now. Multiple property owners have come forward with complaints about excessive fines, harassment, and intimidation. Your case opened a door." "What about Deborah?" Dad asked. "She is still under investigation. We need to prove she knew about the forged order or instructed Cross to create it. That is harder than it sounds. She is claiming she relied on her attorney's expertise." Jim Peterson filed a civil lawsuit on Dad's behalf, seeking a declaration that the 2019 registration form did not create HOA jurisdiction, plus damages for harassment and the attempted illegal eviction. The lawsuit laid out everything: the forged court order, the years of harassment, the meeting minutes discussing acquiring his property, all of it. The local news ran a story about Dad's situation. The segment showed his beautiful cabin, interviewed him about building it himself, and contrasted it with Deborah's expensive home in the development. Public sympathy was strongly on Dad's side. The reporter found other Pine Ridge Estates residents willing to talk about HOA overreach, including a family that had been fined $12,000 for painting their front door the wrong shade of gray. But Deborah did not back down. Instead, the HOA held an emergency meeting and voted to install a security gate at the main entrance to Pine Ridge Estates. The problem was that the main entrance road crossed Dad's property line for about 50 feet. When Dad bought his land, there was only a dirt road. The development used that access and eventually paved it, but they never obtained a formal easement. They just assumed they could use it. Jim Peterson was ecstatic when he heard. "They just handed us leverage. They cannot cut off access to your father's property. And if they try to claim an easement by long use, we can demand compensation for the past 20 years. The HOA installed the gate anyway. It was a massive black iron thing with a guardhouse and electronic access system. They put it right across the road, blocking the main entrance. Residents received electronic key fobs. Dad received nothing. The first time Dad tried to leave his property, the gate was closed and locked. He called the HOA office. Deborah herself answered. "Mr. Yates, as you are not a member in good standing of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA, you do not have access to the security gate. You will need to find another route to the main road." "There is no other route," Dad said. "You blocked the only access." "That sounds like a personal problem," Deborah said and hung up. Dad called Jim Peterson, who immediately filed an emergency motion for injunctive relief. The hearing was set for 3 days later. In the meantime, Dad was trapped on his own property unless he wanted to drive through the forest, which was impossible. I drove up from Boston again that weekend. Dad was furious in a way I had rarely seen. "They blocked me in, like I am a prisoner on my own land." "The judge will order them to give you access," I said. "I am not waiting for a judge," Dad said. He was looking at something on his laptop, a slight smile on his face. "I am going to solve this problem myself." "Dad, what are you planning? You remember Bobby Thornton?" "I worked with him for years. He runs a commercial construction company now. Big projects, heavy equipment." "Okay," I said slowly. "Bobby owes me a favor, a big one. I helped him out years ago when he was getting started, and Bobby has cranes, big ones." I stared at Dad. "You are not serious." That gate is on my property. They installed it without my permission, blocking my legal access to the public road. I have every right to remove it. Dad, you cannot just tear down an HOA gate with a crane. Why not? He asked calmly. It is an illegal obstruction on my property. I called Jim. He said while he would not officially advise it, property owners have a right to remove illegal obstructions from their land. Jim said that. His exact words were, make sure you document everything and try not to damage anything beyond the immediate obstruction. Dad called Bobby Thornton and I listened to the conversation. Bobby's laughter boomed through the phone. Xander, you want me to bring a crane to tear down an HOA gate. This is the best thing I have heard all year. When do you need it? Tomorrow morning, Dad said. Early. Before they know what is happening. I will bring the crew, Bobby said. No charge. This one is for every property owner who has ever dealt with power-hungry HOA nonsense. That night, Dad and I walked the property line with a surveyor's map and confirmed what we already knew. The gate sat squarely on Dad's property, about 30 feet inside his boundary. The HOA had never obtained permission or an easement. They just built it and assumed Dad would not fight back. They made a mistake, Dad said quietly. They thought I was just some old man they could push around. But I have built things my entire life. I know how to take things apart too. The next morning, I woke at 5 a.m. to the sound of heavy trucks coming up the road. Bobby Thornton arrived with a full construction crew and a massive mobile crane, the kind used to build skyscrapers. The crane had to be driven in carefully, but Bobby's crew knew what they were doing. Dad met Bobby in the driveway. They were both in their 70s now, but they hugged like brothers. Xander, you have got to tell me the whole story, Bobby said. Dad laid it all out while the crew set up the crane. Bobby's expression grew darker as he listened. They tried to steal your property with a forged court order during an ice storm. That about sums it up, Dad said. Then let us go tear down their gate, Bobby said. I was recording everything on my phone. The crane was positioned. The crew attached chains to the gate's main posts, and Bobby himself operated the controls. The gate was substantial, built to look impressive and permanent. But against a construction crane designed to lift tons of steel beams, it was nothing. The posts pulled free from their concrete foundations with a grinding screech of metal. The entire gate structure lifted into the air, hanging from the crane like a toy. Bobby swung it carefully to the side and lowered it onto the grass next to the road, completely clear of the driving surface. The guardhouse was next. It was a prefabricated structure, bolted to a concrete pad. The crew unbolted it, attached lifting straps, and the crane picked up the entire building and moved it off the road. The whole operation took about 40 minutes. When they were done, the road was completely clear. Dad's access was restored. The gate and guardhouse sat on HOA common property, undamaged but completely removed from their original location. Cars started coming out of the Pine Ridge estates as residents left for work. They slowed down, staring at the crane and the displaced gate. Several people took pictures. One older couple stopped and applauded. Then Deborah's white Range Rover came speeding up. She jumped out, her face purple with rage. What do you think you are doing? That is HOA property. You cannot just destroy it, Dad walked over calmly. We did not destroy anything. The gate is right there, undamaged. But it was illegally obstructing access to my property. I had it removed. I am calling the police, Deborah screamed. You are going to be arrested. Go ahead, Dad said. Please do. I would love to have Deputy Richardson come back and hear about how you blocked my legal access to the public road. Deborah was on her phone immediately, yelling at someone. Within 20 minutes, Deputy Richardson arrived, along with another deputy. She looked at the crane, the displaced gate, and Dad standing there calmly with Bobby and his crew. "Mr. Yates, did you remove the HOA gate?" she asked. "I removed an illegal obstruction from my property," Dad said. "The gate was installed without my permission, blocking my access to the public road. Here is the survey showing the property line." Deputy Richardson examined the survey documents, walked the area, and took measurements. Then she turned to Deborah. "Miss Fletcher, did the HOA obtain Mr. Yates's permission to install this gate on his property?" "The gate is for community security," Deborah said. "The HOA has authority to install security measures on his private property without permission?" Deputy Richardson asked. "That is not how property rights work. Mr. Yates had every legal right to remove an unauthorized structure from his land. He cannot just hire a crane and tear down an HOA gate," Deborah shouted. "Actually, he can," Deputy Richardson said. "As long as he did not damage any property beyond what was necessary to remove the obstruction, which it appears he did not. The gate is intact. The guardhouse is intact. They are just no longer blocking his access." Deborah looked like she might explode. "This is not over. The HOA will sue for damages for the cost of reinstallation for everything." "You do that," Dad said quietly. "And we will countersue for blocking my access, for harassment, for attempted theft, and for every illegal thing you have done over the past 5 years. I look forward to it." The deputies left. Bobby and his crew packed up the crane and prepared to leave. Before Bobby got in his truck, Dad shook his hand. "I cannot thank you enough. Xander, I meant what I said. This one is on me. I have watched HOAs destroy people for years. Somebody needs to stand up to them." "You just did." After the crew left, Dad and I sat on his porch. A steady stream of Pine Ridge Estates residents drove past, many of them slowing down to look at the removed gate. Several stopped to talk to Dad. They thanked him. One woman said she was forming a group to recall the HOA board. Another man said he was filing his own lawsuit for harassment. "You started something," I told Dad. "I just want to live in peace on my own land," he said. "But if other people benefit from fighting back, that is good too." The legal battles intensified over the following weeks. The HOA filed an emergency motion claiming Dad had destroyed their property and demanding he pay for replacement and reinstallation. Jim Peterson countered with evidence that the gate was illegally placed on Dad's property without permission or easement. The judge was not sympathetic to the HOA. "Miss Fletcher, did your organization obtain Mr. Yates's permission before installing this gate?" Judge Harrison asked during the hearing. The HOA's new attorney, since Martin Cross was facing criminal charges, tried to argue that the gate was for community safety, and the HOA had implied authority to install security measures. "Implied authority on private property belonging to a non-member," Judge Harrison said skeptically. "I do not think so. Motion denied. Furthermore, I am granting Mr. Yates's motion for injunctive relief. The HOA is prohibited from obstructing his access to the public road in any way." But the bigger breakthrough came from the district attorney's investigation. Martin Cross, facing serious jail time for the forged court order, made a deal. He turned over emails and recordings that proved Deborah had explicitly instructed him to get the court order by any means necessary, because she wanted to seize the property during the ice storm, while Xander was unable to defend it. Deputy Richardson came to Dad's cabin on a cold February morning to deliver the news personally. "Mr. Yates, we are arresting Deborah Fletcher today on charges of fraud, attempted theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Martin Cross's cooperation gave us everything we needed." "Elder abuse?" Dad asked. "You are 73 years old. She tried to illegally evict you from your primary residence during a weather emergency. That is textbook elder abuse under Maine law. She is looking at significant prison time if convicted. The arrest made regional news. Video of Deborah being led out of her house in handcuffs ran on every station. The story of the HOA's corruption, the forged court order, and Dad fighting back with a crane became a viral sensation. Dad did several interviews, always calm and measured, explaining that he just wanted to live peacefully on land he had worked his entire life to build on. The criminal case took months to wind through the system. Deborah maintained her innocence, claiming everything was a misunderstanding. But the evidence was overwhelming. The emails to Martin Cross were explicit. The meeting minutes showing her obsession with acquiring Dad's property established motive. The forged court order and attempted eviction during an ice storm showed the crime itself. In July, Deborah pleaded guilty to reduced charges: fraud, filing false documents, and reckless endangerment. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. Martin Cross received 1 year in jail and disbarment. The civil case was more complex. Jim Peterson filed an expanded lawsuit on behalf of Dad and 17 other Pine Ridge Estates property owners who had been harassed, fined excessively, or intimidated by the HOA leadership. The lawsuit sought dissolution of the HOA, return of all improperly collected fines, and damages. The HOA's insurance company saw the writing on the wall and pushed for settlement. In September, nearly 8 months after the ice storm, a settlement agreement was reached. The HOA admitted no wrongdoing, but agreed to dissolve and return all properties to independent ownership. All existing fines and liens were canceled. Each plaintiff received compensation for damages. Dad received $75,000, enough to cover all his legal fees and compensate him for the stress and harassment. More importantly, the restrictive covenants were voided. Every property owner in the former Pine Ridge Estates was now free to paint their house any color they wanted, park their vehicles wherever they wanted, and landscape however they wanted. The settlement was finalized in October. I drove up to Maine to be with Dad for the signing. We sat at Jim Peterson's office and Dad signed the papers with a steady hand. "How do you feel?" I asked him afterward. "Tired," Dad admitted, "but satisfied. They tried to take everything from me and they failed. More importantly, we exposed their corruption. They cannot hurt anyone else now." We drove back to the cabin. The fall colors were spectacular, the trees around Dad's property ablaze with reds and golds. His vegetable garden had been harvested, and he was already planning next year's planting. The cabin looked exactly as it always had: beautiful, handmade, and completely his own. "I am going to put up a new gate," Dad said as we sat on the porch. "A nice simple wooden one just for my property, something welcoming, not controlling." "That sounds perfect," I said. Over the next few weeks, Dad built the gate himself. It was a work of art, crafted from cedar with traditional joinery, no screws or nails. It swung smoothly on heavy hinges and was never locked. Several former Pine Ridge Estates residents stopped by to admire it and to thank Dad for fighting back against the HOA. The development changed rapidly. Without the HOA's restrictive rules, personality returned to the neighborhood. One family painted their house a cheerful yellow. Another installed a white picket fence. A retired couple started a small hobby farm with chickens and bees. The sterile uniformity disappeared, replaced by individual expression. Dad's legal battle became a case study in HOA reform. Jim Peterson used it in presentations to state legislators, advocating for stronger protections for property owners and limits on HOA authority. Several bills were introduced in the Maine legislature based on lessons learned from the Pine Ridge Estates case. The ice storm that had started everything became a distant memory, but its impact lasted. The weather had revealed the HOA's true nature and given Dad the chance to fight back when they overreached. Sometimes disasters bring out the worst in people, but they also create opportunities for justice. I visited Dad regularly over the following year. Each time, the cabin felt more like a monument to perseverance. He had built it with his own hands, defended it against coordinated legal attack, and won. The property value did not matter to him, nor did appearances. What mattered was that this was his place, built according to his vision, standing as proof that ordinary people could resist institutional bullying. One evening the following spring, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Dad was carving a new sign for his gate, something simple and welcoming. His hands were still steady, still skilled from decades of carpentry. "You regret any of it?" I asked. "The stress, the legal battles, all of it," Dad thought for a moment. "No, I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Deborah and her friends thought they could control other people's lives and property. But fighting back, standing up for what was right, no regrets at all. You inspired a lot of people," I said. "I still get messages about you from people dealing with their own HOA problems." "I just did what anyone should do when someone tries to steal from them," Dad said. "I fought back. I did not let them win through intimidation or fake authority. More people should do that." The sign he was carving was almost finished. It read simply, "Yates Cabin built with pride, defended with courage." He planned to mount it on the new cedar gate. "That seems a little dramatic," I joked. Dad smiled. "Maybe, but it is true. I built this place with everything I had, and when they tried to take it, I defended it. Future generations should know that property rights matter, that standing up to bullies is possible, and that sometimes you have to bring a crane to tear down illegal gates." We both laughed. The absurdity of that morning would never get old. A 73-year-old man calling in a construction crane to remove an HOA gate that never should have been installed. It was excessive, dramatic, and absolutely necessary. The legal reforms that followed the case made real differences. Maine passed a law requiring HOAs to obtain explicit written consent from property owners before claiming jurisdiction, preventing the kind of registration form trickery that had been used against Dad. Another law prohibited HOAs from taking enforcement action during declared states of emergency. A third increased penalties for fraudulent court filings and made it easier for victims to recover damages. Dad received recognition from the state legislature for his role in exposing HOA abuse. He attended the ceremony wearing his work clothes, uncomfortable with the attention but proud of the changes that had resulted. Several other property owners who had been victimized by aggressive HOAs testified that day, and the legislative committee promised additional reforms. The former Pine Ridge Estates became a model for what neighborhoods could be without oppressive HOA control. Property values remained stable, despite Deborah's predictions of chaos. People took care of their homes because they wanted to, not because they feared fines. The community actually became stronger, with neighbors helping each other rather than reporting violations to a board. Bobby Thornton and his construction company gained national attention from the crane incident. He was interviewed on several news programs and became something of a folk hero for standing up to help a friend against HOA overreach. His business grew significantly, and he made it a company policy never to work on HOA projects that involved restricting property owners' rights. Jim Peterson built an entire practice area around HOA defense, representing property owners across Maine and consulting on cases in other states. He credited Dad's case with showing him how predatory some HOAs could be, and how much people needed strong legal advocacy against institutional overreach. As for me, I learned valuable lessons about standing up for principle even when the fight seems overwhelming. Dad could have given up when Deborah showed up with the forged court order. He could have paid the illegitimate fines to avoid conflict. He could have walked away from the property he loved. Instead, he fought back with every legal tool available and won decisively. The cabin stands today as a testament to individual rights and the importance of resisting those who abuse authority. Dad still lives there, still tends his garden, still builds furniture in his workshop. The property looks exactly as he wants it to look, which is all he ever asked for. Sometimes on quiet evenings, sitting on the porch, Dad and I talk about that ice storm morning when everything changed. The memory of Deborah marching through the snow with her fake court order still makes him angry. But the memory of Bobby's crane lifting that illegal gate off his property makes him smile every time. Best $7,500 I never had to pay, Dad jokes, referring to what the crane service would have cost if Bobby had not donated it. The story spread beyond Maine. Property owners dealing with HOA problems contact Dad regularly, asking for advice. He always tells them the same thing: document everything, know your rights, find a good lawyer, and never back down when you are in the right. Sometimes you have to get creative. Sometimes you need to make noise. But you cannot let institutions steal from you. Just because they claim authority they do not legitimately possess. The cabin that Dad built with his own hands remains his legacy. But the fight he waged to defend it became something larger. A reminder that individual property rights matter, that institutional bullying can be defeated, and that sometimes the right response to an illegal gate is to bring in a crane. The settlement money allowed Dad to make some improvements to the property. He built a new workshop, installed solar panels for energy independence, and put in a backup generator. He made sure he would never be vulnerable to the kind of infrastructure disruptions that had made him vulnerable during the ice storm. The vegetable garden expanded. Dad hired a landscaper who specialized in native plants to help design gardens that supported local wildlife. The property became even more beautiful, and Deborah's criticism of it being an eyesore was revealed as nothing more than a pretense for control. Several academic researchers contacted Dad to interview him about HOA reform and property rights. His case appeared in law school textbooks as an example of HOA overreach and the remedies available to property owners. Jim Peterson gave guest lectures about the case, and Dad sometimes joined him to provide the property owner's perspective. The former HOA board members mostly disappeared from public life after the scandal. The two men who had been with Deborah during the attempted eviction resigned and moved away. The silver-haired man sold his house at a loss and left town. None of them faced criminal charges beyond Deborah, but their reputations were destroyed. The property at the main entrance where the gate had been became a community garden. Dad donated the use of the land, and neighbors came together to create raised beds for vegetables, flowers, and herbs. It was open to everyone, with no rules beyond basic courtesy. The contrast with the old HOA's controlling nature was deliberate and satisfying. Bobby Thornton organized an annual charity event at his construction company to raise money for property owners fighting abusive HOAs. The kickoff event featured the crane that had removed the gate, and people paid to have their pictures taken in the operator's seat. The event raised over $100,000 in its first year and became an annual tradition. The judge who had unwittingly had her signature forged, Judge Martinez, took a personal interest in the case's aftermath. She worked with the district attorney to tighten procedures for issuing property-related court orders, making forgery much more difficult. She also ruled on several subsequent cases involving HOA overreach, consistently siding with property owners when HOAs exceeded their authority. Dad's story resonated because it touched on something fundamental: the right to live peacefully on property you own without arbitrary interference. The fact that he had built the cabin with his own hands made it even more powerful. This was not just any property. This was his life's work, his retirement dream, his tangible accomplishment. And he had successfully defended it against people who thought money and fake authority gave them the right to take it. The media attention eventually faded, but the impact remained. Property owners across the country cited Dad's case when pushing back against their own HOAs. Reform organizations used it as a rallying point. The phrase "bring your own crane" became shorthand for creative resistance to institutional overreach. Years later, Dad still receives occasional letters from people thanking him. They are from property owners who successfully defended their rights, sometimes using lessons learned from his case. Each letter confirms that his fight mattered beyond just his own property. The cabin remains Dad's refuge and his pride. Every log, every stone in the fireplace, every custom detail represents his skill and vision. No HOA board, no matter how aggressive or corrupt, could take that away. They tried with forged documents and illegal tactics, and they failed completely. On the 5th anniversary of the ice storm, Dad held a small gathering at the cabin. Bobby Thornton came along with Jim Peterson, several former Pine Ridge Estates residents, and Deputy Richardson, who had since retired. They shared stories, ate good food, and celebrated the victory that had changed so many lives. Bobby raised a toast to Xander, who taught us that sometimes you need to fight back with everything you have got, even if that means calling in a crane. Everyone laughed and drank. Dad looked around at the people gathered on his property in the cabin he built and smiled. He had won not just a legal battle, but something more important. He had shown that ordinary people could stand up to institutional bullying and win. He had inspired others to fight for their rights. And he had protected the home he loved. The sun set over the property that evening, casting long shadows through the trees Dad had preserved when building the cabin. The cedar gate he had made swung gently in the breeze, never locked, always welcoming. The vegetable garden showed the first signs of the coming harvest. Everything was exactly as it should be. His property, his rules, his life. As I drove back to Boston that night, I thought about everything Dad had been through. The harassment, the attempted theft, the stress of legal battles, all of it could have broken him. Instead, it revealed his strength and determination. He had faced down corrupt officials, fraudulent lawyers, and institutional intimidation, and he had won decisively. The cabin stood as a monument to what one person could accomplish through skill, determination, and courage. Dad built it with his hands and defended it with everything he had. No one could take that away from him. Not through fake authority, not through forged documents, not through anything. In the end, the story was simple. An HOA tried to steal an elderly man's property during an emergency using illegal tactics. He fought back, exposed their corruption, and brought a crane to tear down their illegal gate. Justice prevailed, criminals went to jail, and the property owner kept his home. It was everything right about the legal system working correctly, and everything important about standing up for what matters. Dad's cabin sits today exactly as he built it, protected by law and his own determination. The gate he crafted welcomes visitors. The garden feeds his family and neighbors. The workshop produces beautiful furniture. And everyone who knows the story remembers that sometimes, when institutions abuse their power, ordinary people can fight back and win. All it takes is courage, good legal help, and occasionally, a really big crane.